Chapter 46, The Things They Unleashed. Time skip, Sokovia. Shield. Steve's POV. The Avengers are in the process of infiltrating a Hydra base in Sokovia, making their way through the woods and fighting soldiers. Tony flew towards the building but accidentally hits the roof. Shit. Steve focusing on fighting. Language. JARVIS, what's the view from upstairs? Jarvis answers Steve. The central building is protected by some kind of energy shield. Strucker's technology is well beyond any other Hydra base we've taken. Thor fights the soldiers. Loki's scepter must be here. Strucker couldn't mount this defense without it, at long last. Natasha knocks out some soldiers. At long last is lasting a little long, boys. Clint shoots an explosive arrow. Yeah, I think we lost the element of surprise. Tony flies past. Wait a second. No one else is going to deal with the fact that Cap just said language. Steve throws his bike at some soldiers driving up in their truck. I know, just slipped out. Time skip, Hydra base. Brain. Strucker POV. Strucker walks into the building. Who gave the order to attack? One of the fortress soldiers look over to him. Herr Strucker, it's the Avengers. The other soldier speaks up. They landed in the far woods. The perimeter guard panicked. Strucker looks over to List. They have to be after the scepter. He looks back to the soldier. Can we hold them? The soldier shakes his head. They're the Avengers. Strucker yells. Deploy the rest of the tanks. Concentrate fire on the weak ones. A hit can make them close ranks. He looks over to List again. Everything we've accomplished, but we're on the verge of our greatest breakthrough. List tells him, then let's show them what we've accomplished. Send out the twins. Strucker looks over to the twins for a moment, then shook his head. No, let's release our other subject first. List looks at him, confused, as Strucker looks over to the technician. Strucker tells the technician, wake her, neutralize the humanity inhibitor and trigger the predatory response. If Klaus Mikkelsen didn't want her, Hydra certainly does. The technician frantically types. Revering sedation. The Alia Mikkelsen subject is active. Inside the glass, a young woman's eyes snapped open. They weren't human as they glowed with a terrifying, shifting mixture of amber and crimson. As the glass hissed open, Alia stepped out, her expression cold and devoid of any emotion. Hydra's conditioning had successfully locked her humanity away, leaving only the Quadbrid's lethal instincts. Wanda and Pietro looks over the woman scared. Go, Strucker commanded. Tear them apart. Alia didn't speak. She vanished in a blur of supernatural speed, leaving only a gust of wind behind. Time skip, Sokovia. Shield. Steve's POV. Jarvis speaks to Tony. Sir, the city is taking fire. Tony replies as he flies. Well, we know Strucker's not going to worry about civilian casualties. Send in the Iron Legion. Pietro held Wanda as he uses his speed to run away, and they start to attack as Pietro took the arrow that Clint used to attack the base before he attacked Clint. Pietro looks at Clint as he smirks. You didn't see that coming. He runs off as Clint stood up and sets his bow, but he gets shot. Natasha hears Clint groaning. Clint! She runs over to him as Pietro knocks Steve down. Steve looks around as he speaks through the comms. We have an enhanced in the field. Natasha replies, Clint's hit. She helps Clint and looks at the bunker. Somebody want to deal with that bunker. The Hulk roars as he estrays the bunker. Steve regains his footing, but the air temperature suddenly spikes. A blur, different from the first, slams into his shield with bone-breaking force. Steve yells into the comms. Stark, we really need to get inside. There's another one. Alia appears, her face shifting with dark veins and glowing eyes. She doesn't speak. She simply snarls, her hands crackling with siphoned magic as she lunges at Steve with a hellhound's ferocity. Thor looks confused. The enhanced. Steve gritting his teeth as he parries from Alia's claw. He's a blue, but this girl, she's everything at once. Alia sweeps Steve's legs and prepares to dive for his throat. In the heat of the moment, Steve remembers Alisa's warning about the Mikkelsen bloodline and vampires in general. If a vampire is attacking you, Steve snapped their necks. It makes them pass out. As Alia leaps, Steve sidesteps, catches her head in a precise hold, and executes a sharp, tactical twist. A loud crack echoes. Alia's body goes limp instantly. Steve catches her, laying her hidden behind a fallen cedar. Steve tells the team, "One enchanted neutralized, moving to the base." Stark enters the base, clears the soldiers, and finds the secret room. Meanwhile, Steve corners Strucker. Steve looks at him. Baron Strucker, Hydra's #1 thug. Strucker smirks. "Technically, I'm a thug for S.H.I.E.L.D." Steve looks at him. "Well, then technically you're unemployed. Where's Loki's scepter?" Strucker sighs. "Don't worry, I know when I'm beat. You'll mention how I cooperated, I hope." Wanda comes out quietly as Steve speaks. "I'll put it right under illegal human experimentation. How many are there?" Wanda knocks Steve down using her telekinetic powers, then quickly leaves. Steve speaks through his comms. "We have a third enhanced, another female, do not engage." He looks over to Strucker as Strucker speaks. "You'll have to be faster then." He's cut off mid-sentence when Steve uses his shield to knock him out. "Guys, I got Strucker." Tony speaks through the comms. "Yeah, I got something bigger." Inside the secret passageway, Stark finds a room with a variety of technology, as well as recovered artifacts from the Battle of New York, including a gigantic Chitauri Leviathan and some of his scrapped armor. He then spots the scepter. "Thor, I have eyes on the surprise." Wanda creeps up behind him and uses her powers on him. Suddenly, the Chitauri corpse comes to life, and Stark sees the rest of the Avengers team are all laying on the floor dead. He goes over to Steve's body to check his pulse when Steve suddenly grabs him. Steve in the vision looks at him. "You could have saved us." Steve dies, but Stark continues to hear Steve's voice in his head. "Why didn't you do more?" Stark sees that he is in the Chitauri realm and that the Chitauri are invading Earth when he snaps back to reality. Wanda and Pietro watch as Tony summons his suit gauntlet. Pietro whispers to Wanda, "Where is she? Where is Alia?" Wanda looks over to him. "The captain stopped her. She's alive, Pietro." Pietro looks over Tony as Tony takes the sector. "We're just gonna let them take it." Wanda smiles, knowing the seed of fear is planted. Pietro blurs away, but not to the jet, but toward the woods to retrieve the unconscious girl who holds his heart, even if her humanity is currently lost to the dark. Time skip, viewing room, Avengers Tower. Black. Alisa's POV. The room was dim, lit only by the soft blue glow of the screen. Alisa stood near the center, arms loosely crossed, her posture calm, but the tension lived in her shoulders, in the way her fingers curled slightly against her sleeves. She hadn't asked JARVIS to show her this, which meant one thing. This mattered. "Miss Alisa, Captain Rogers' recent mission log has been compiled." Her gaze flickered to the screen. "Of course it has," she murmured under her breath. And then the footage began. Steve Rogers moved through the trees with practiced precision, his focus absolute, shield already in motion as he cut through Hydra soldiers. Alisa didn't move. Didn't blink. She watched him like she always did, when he wasn't looking like she was memorizing him. Tony's voice cut through the chaos. "Shit." And right on cue, Steve yells, "Language." A small, involuntary smile tugged at her lips. "That's him," she whispered quietly. The screen filled with motion as Thor bringing down soldiers with godlike force. Natasha Romanoff moving like a shadow, Clint Barton covering from a distance. And Steve was everywhere. Leading, protecting, adapting. Alice's expression softened, but her eyes betrayed her. Pride and fear, always both. The scene cut. Strucker and Hydra. And then, wake her. Neutralize the humanity inhibitor. Alice's entire body went still. Her jaw tightened as the name registered. Alia Mikkelsen, the daughter of Ryan Mikkelsen. When the girl's eyes snapped open, glowing, wrong, stripped of anything human, and Alice's breath caught, sharp and quiet. "No," she whispered. "Not like this. Not controlled. Not emptied out." Her hand dropped to her side, fingers curling into a fist. She knew exactly what Hydra had done, and she hated how familiar it looked. Back in Sokovia, the moment Alia hit Steve, Alisa stepped forward instinctively, like distance meant nothing. "Steve." The name barely left her lips. Alia moved like a storm, feral, precise, lethal. Not like Pietro. No hesitation or confusion. Just instinct and violence. Steve held his ground barely. Alice's eyes tracked every movement, every block, every shift in his footing. He was adjusting, learning, and surviving. And then he remembered. If a vampire is attacking you, Steve snapped their necks. Alisa froze. Her expression shifted, something softer breaking through the tension. "You remembered." It wasn't surprise, not really. It was something deeper, and something that settled quietly in her chest, which is trust. Steve moved fast. Deliberate. Controlled. Crack. Alisa flinched, but she didn't look away. She watched as Alia's body went limp. Watched as Steve caught her. Lowered her carefully behind cover. Not like an enemy or something to discard. Like someone who still mattered. Alisa exhaled slowly, her shoulders easing just slightly. "That's why," she murmured, barely audible. Her gaze lingered on him on the screen. "That's why I chose you." The footage continued. Strucker, Wanda, the scepter, but Alice's focus never really left Steve. Even when he spoke through the comms. Even when the fight shifted again. Her eyes stayed on him. Tracking. Watching. Understanding. Because beneath all of it, the chaos, the war, the unknown threats, she saw the same thing she always had. Not just a soldier. Not just a leader. But a man who listened. Who carried her words into battle, and who trusted her world enough to act on it. Behind her, the room remained quiet. JRVIS said nothing. But if Alisa had turned around, if she had stepped away from the screen, even for a moment, she might have noticed something else cued in the system. Something not yet shown. A file. Encrypted. Marked under Steve Rogers' personal logs. A small velvet box. A plan. A question he hadn't asked yet. Alisa didn't know, not yet. She just stood there, watching him fight. Unaware that somewhere between the battles and the quiet moments, Steve Rogers was already planning forever. Chapter 47, The Calm Before the Consequence. Time skip on the Quinjet. The Avengers are on an aircraft heading out of Sokovia. Natasha interrupts Banner, who's listening to opera with his headphones. Natasha looks at Bruce. "Hey, the lullaby worked better than ever." Bruce shakes his head. "Just wasn't expecting a code green." Natasha looks at him. "If you hadn't been there, there would have been double the casualties. My best friend would have been a treasured memory." Bruce does a little smile. "You know, sometimes exactly what I want to hear isn't exactly what I want to hear." Natasha's smile faded. "How long before you trust me?" Bruce shakes his head. "It's not you I don't trust." Natasha does a little smile. "Thor, report on the Hulk." Thor walks over. The gates of hell are filled with the screams of his victims. Natasha glares at Thor, and Banner groans in despair. Thor backpedals. But not the screams of the dead, of course. No, wounded screams, mainly whimpering, a great deal of complaining and tailies of sprained deltoids and gout. Steve quietly asks Jarvis to tell Alisa that he's on his way back, as the others speak. Tony looks at Bruce. "Hey Banner, Dr. Cho's on her way in from Seoul. Is it okay if she sets up in your lab?" Bruce looks over to Tony. Yeah, she knows her way around." Tony looks back at the sky as he speaks to Jarvis after Steve walks over to the others. "Thanks. Tell her to prep everything. Barton's gonna need the full treatment." Jarvis speaks up. "Very good, sir." Tony stood up. Jarvis take the wheel." He then spoke to Thor and Steve. "It feels good, yeah. I mean, you've been after this thing since S.H.I.E.L.D. collapsed. Not that I haven't enjoyed our little raiding parties, but..." Thor shakes his head. "No, but this brings it to a close." Steve looks at them. "As soon as we find out what else this has been used for, I don't just mean weapons. Since when is Strucker capable of human enhancement?" Tony looks at the sector as he speaks. "Banner, and I'll give it the once before it goes back to Asgard. Is that cool with you?" Thor nods as Tony continues. "I mean, just a few days until the farewell party. You're staying, right?" Thor nods again. Yes, of course. A victory should be honored with revels." Tony leans forward slightly. "Yeah, who doesn't love revels, Captain?" Steve looks at the sector before looking over to them. "Hopefully this puts an end to the Chitauri and Hydra, so yes, revels." The Avengers aircraft lands at the Avengers Tower in New York, where Barton is taken by Dr. Cho to have his wounds tended to. Maria walks up to Stark, and Steve walks over to Alisa and pulls her into a hug. Maria speaks to Tony. "Lab's all set up, boss." Tony, swaggering despite the grime on his face, pointed a thumb back at Steve. Actually, he's the boss. I just pay for everything and design everything and make everyone look cooler." Alisa cut a side-eye toward Tony, her expression deadpan. "And apparently, you provide the snappy commentary while others do the heavy lifting. Good to know the hierarchy is still intact, Stark." Tony opened his mouth to retort, but Steve stepped back into the circle, his focus shifting to the mission at hand. "What's the word on Strucker?" "NATO's got him," Hill replied. "The three enhanced?" Alisa asked, her voice sharpening. She had felt the shift in the air when they arrived, a static charge that didn't belong to the Quinjet's engines. Hill looked at her, then back to the file. "Wanda and Pietro Maximoff, twins, orphaned at 10 when a shell collapsed their apartment building. Sokovia's had a rough history. It's nowhere special, but it's on the way to everywhere special. And then there's Alia Mickelson, a quabrid, vampire, werewolf, witch, and hellhound. She's the wild card." Alisa's brow furrowed. She shifted her weight, her senses dialing in on the unease radiating from the team. "A quabrid? That's a lot of variables for one person to carry. What are the twins' specs?" "He's got increased metabolism and improved thermal homeostasis," Hill said, glancing at Steve's confused expression. She simplified. "He's fast. She's weird. Neural electric interfacing, telekinesis, mental manipulation." "The girl," Alisa intervened, her voice low. "She didn't just fight you. She got inside, didn't she? I can see it in the way the energy in this room just dropped." Steve looked at Alisa, surprised by how quickly she'd hit the nerve. "They're going to show up again," he said, turning back to Hill. "Agreed," Hill said. "File says they volunteered for Strucker's experiments. It's nuts." "Right," Steve said, his voice tinged with a bitterness he usually kept hidden. "What kind of monster would let a German scientist experiment on them to protect their country?" "We're not at war, Captain," Hill reminded him. "They are," Steve said firmly. Alisa stepped forward, placing herself subtly between Steve and the heavy atmosphere of the hangar. She looked at the scepter being wheeled away, her skin prickling with a sudden, localized chill. "They aren't just at war with the world, Steve," Alisa said, her eyes fixed on the glowing blue gem. "They're at war with us. You don't volunteer for something like that unless your hate is the only thing keeping you warm." She glanced at Hill, then back at Steve. "Strucker didn't just build weapons, he built grudges, and those are a lot harder to disarm." She reached out, catching Steve's hand, her thumb brushing over his knuckles. "Go get cleaned up. I'll keep an eye on things here. My heightened senses are telling me Stark is about to do something expensive and probably ill-advised." Tony, walking away, didn't even look back. "I heard that, and for the record, it's only ill-advised if it doesn't work." Alisa watched him go, her gaze lingering on the scepter. She didn't like the way the air felt around it, heavy, oily, and far too quiet. "He's going to poke the beehive, Steve," she murmured. Steve sighed, leaning into her space one last time. "I know, just stay close." "Always," she promised. Chapter 48. The party before the apocalypse. Time skip, Avengers Tower. Maria was making drinks and C looks over to Tony and Thor. "Hey, what about Jane? Where are the ladies, gentlemen?" Tony shook his head. "Well, Miss Potts has a company to run." Thor points to him for a moment. "Yes, I'm not even sure what country Jane's in." Alisa leans against the bar. "It's okay to admit they're both more successful than you, guys. The honesty is refreshing." Tony looks at her, but Maria cuts in as she speaks to Alisa. "How are you liking New York? A bit louder than Portland." Alisa shrugs her shoulders. "A lot more people trying to sell me things, and significantly fewer trees. I'm mostly just here to make sure Steve doesn't try to pay for a taxi with a war bond." Her eyes flick over to Steve and Sam as they walked upstairs to speak to each other. Sam talks to Steve. "Sounds like a hell of a fight. Sorry I missed it." Steve shook his head. "If I had known it was gonna be a firefight, I absolutely would have called." Sam smiles. No, I'm not actually sorry. I'm just trying to sound tough. I'm very happy chasing cold leads on our missing persons case. Avenging is your world. Your world is crazy." They look over the balcony and Steve looks at Alisa, who is laughing with Maria. Sam looks at him. "How's Miss Portland doing with everyone?" Steve looks at him, then back at Alisa. "She's doing incredibly well, honestly. Better than I expected given everything. I was a little worried about how she'd handle the sheer chaos of this place, but look at her. She's holding her own with Maria Hill, which is no easy feat. Alisa's tough, Sam. She's adjusted to this world faster than I ever did. Honestly, seeing her laugh like that, with everything she's been through and everything she is, it's exactly what she deserves. I'm just glad she's here." Sam looks at him and smiles before Steve looks over to him to ask him, "What about you? How's the woman from the front desk?" Sam's smile widened, a quiet, genuine chuckle escaping him as he shook his head. He looked down at the balcony railing for a moment, the warmth in his expression deepening before he looked back up at Steve. "The receptionist?" Sam asked, shifting his weight. "She's great, man, but you've got your wires crossed. She's just a friend who helps me organize the schedules at the VA. No, the woman I've actually been spending my time with. Her name is Lillth. She's a medical volunteer there. And honestly, she's the one who's been keeping me grounded lately." Down by the bar, Alice's glass paused halfway to her lips. Even with the low hum of the party, Tony's sharp banter, and Maria pouring drinks right in front of her, Alice's enhanced Grimm senses picked up the name instantly. Lillth. Her mind immediately flashed back to the community center. She remembered the fluid, predatory grace of the woman in the volunteer vest. She remembered following her into that dim room, watching the veins bleed red into her eyes as she drained a stolen blood bag, and that chilling, knowing smirk she had given Alisa. A vampire demon hybrid was wrapping herself around Sam Wilson. Compulsion, Alisa's mind screamed. It had to be. "Excuse me for a second, guys," Alisa said smoothly, keeping her voice completely level as she gave Maria and Tony a quick, apologetic smile. "Need to use the restroom." She slipped away from the bar, her movements deliberate and casual until she bypassed the main party entirely. Navigating the sleek, quiet corridors of Avengers Tower, she ducked into an empty, dimly lit briefing room and shut the heavy door behind her. The silence of the room was absolute. She pulled out her phone, dialing the number she had forcibly dug up after their first unsettling encounter. It didn't even ring twice. A smooth, velvety voice cut through the receiver, dripping with a terrifyingly effortless confidence. "Alisa, I didn't think I'd be hearing from you so soon." "Cut the crap, Lillth," Alisa hissed, keeping her voice low but razor-sharp, the tension in her jaw tightening. "I'm standing in a room full of Avengers, and Sam is upstairs pouring his heart out about you to Steve. What the hell did you do to him?" A low, amused hum vibrated through the speaker. "I do a lot of things, Grimm. You'll have to be more specific." "You know exactly what I mean," Alisa snapped, her knuckles turning white around her phone. "Did you compel him? Did you use that freakish hybrid mind control to force him into falling for you? Because if you touched a single hair on his head, I will hunt you down myself. I don't care who you are." The playful amusement, on the other end of the line instantly vanished. It was replaced by a cold, deadly seriousness that made the hairs on Alisa's arms stand up. The true weight of an apex predator shifting on the other side of the line. "Listen to me very carefully," Lillth said, her voice dropping an octave, deadpan and severe. "I don't play games with his mind. I have never used compulsion on Sam, nor will I ever." Alisa let out a harsh, skeptical breath, leaning against the cold glass of the briefing room window. "And I'm just supposed to take a monster's word for it." "You don't have to take my word for it. Trust your own precious lore, little Grimm," Lillth countered, a sharp, knowing edge returning to her tone. "If you must know, I've been slipping vervain into his coffee every single morning. He has enough of it in his system right now to burn a hole through any vampire who even tries to look at him sideways. I made sure he is completely immune to compulsion, including mine." Alisa caught her breath, her mind racing to process the revelation. Vervain meant absolute protection. It meant no supernatural influence could touch Sam's mind, let alone manipulate his feelings. Lillth wasn't enslaving him, she was shielding him. "So believe what you want about me," Lillth murmured, the dangerous, predatory smirk practically audible through the phone. "But whatever he is saying out there to Steve, whatever he feels for me, that is 100% real. That is all him." Before Alisa could reply, the line went dead. She slowly lowered the phone, the silence of the room wrapping around her as she let out a long, steadying breath. Through the glass doors and across the expanse of the tower, she looked back toward the balcony where Sam and Steve were still talking, Sam laughing at something Steve said, a laugh that was grounded, safe, and entirely his own. After the conversation, Alisa walks back into the room, and she notices Steve is standing with Thor, an elderly man. Thor pours a glass of his beer. "See this? This was aged for 1,000 years, in the barrels built from the wreck of Grunhull's fleet. It is not meant for mortal men." Alisa brow raised at the last line as she saw Thor giving Steve the glass. She knew about the serum changing him, but he's still mortal. The elderly man spoke. "Neither was Omaha Beach. Blondie, stop trying to scare us, come on." Thor looks over to Steve for a moment, as Steve shrugs his shoulder, and Thor sighs before passing the glass over. Alisa notices the elderly man getting drunk and being held by a couple of people who walked him away. Her eyes flick over to Bruce and Natasha as Bruce walked over to her. Bruce smiles nervously. "How'd a nice girl like you wind up working in a dump like this?" Natasha looks at him and plays along. "Fella done me wrong." Bruce shrugs his shoulders. "You got lousy taste in men, kid." Natasha passes him a drink. "He's not so bad, well, he has a temper. Deep down, he's all fluff." Bruce smiles as he takes a sip of his drink and Natasha continues. "Fact is, he's not like anybody I've ever known. All my friends are fighters. And here comes this guy, spends his life avoiding the fight because he knows he'll win." Bruce does a little smile. "Sounds amazing." Alisa notices Steve quietly walking over and leans against the bar as Natasha smirks at Bruce. "He's also a huge dork. Chicks dig that. So what do you think? Should I fight this or run with it?" Bruce looks at her. "Run with it, right? Or did he? What did he do that was so wrong to you?" Natasha smiles. "Not a damn thing, but never say never." She walks off and Steve looks at Bruce before speaking up. "It's nice." Bruce jumps slightly as he looks over to Steve and he stammers. "What is?" Steve looks at him. "You and Romanoff." Alisa walks over and stood beside Steve. Bruce stammers again. "No, we haven't. That wasn't." Alisa's brow raised. "Bruce, she was flirting." The color immediately rushed to Bruce's face, his cheeks turning a prominent shade of pink as his eyes widened behind his glasses. He took a sharp breath, looking around the room as if hopping the ground would swallow him whole before his hands instantly went into motion. He shoved his hands deep into his pockets, then pulled one out to hastily adjust his glasses, clearing his throat roughly. "Flirting," Bruce stammered, his voice jumping an octave as he looked between Alisa and Steve. No, that wasn't. She wasn't, we don't." Natasha doesn't flirt, Alisa. It's probably just a tactical maneuver. She's a spy. She's probably just trying to extract information about my favorite tea brand. Alisa's raised eyebrow didn't budge, and Steve just stood there with a quiet, highly amused smirk playing on his lips. Realizing he was getting absolutely no backup from the captain, Bruce's eyes darted nervously between the two of them. He began to fiddle with the edge of his sleeve, desperately trying to lower his heart rate. "Right, well, be that as it may," Bruce mumbled, shifting his weight awkwardly from foot to foot as he took a step backward. "I should probably go check on the telemetry, or the lab, or literally anything else that doesn't involve my complete lack of a social life. Excuse me." Giving them both a quick, incredibly tense nod, Bruce turned on his heel and shuffled away as fast as he could, leaving Alisa and Steve alone at the bar. Alisa looks over to Steve. "I think I should teach him women movement in romance." Steve does a little chuckle. "Looks like you do." As everyone is sat down laughing, Clint speaks up as he spins his drumsticks. "It's a trick." Thor shook his head as him and Steve clinks their beers together. No, it's much more than that." Clint points to the hammer. "Whosoever be he worthy shall haveth the power. Whatever man, it's a trick." Thor chuckles. "Please be my guest." Clint looks over to everyone. "Really?" Tony nods. "Come on, yeah." Rhodes smirks. "Oh, this is going to be beautiful." Tony looks at Clint. "Clint, you've had a tough week. We won't hold it against you if you can't get it up." Everyone laughs as Clint looks over to Thor. "You know I've seen this before, right?" Barton grabs Thor's hammer and can't lift it, to Thor after he fails to lift the hammer. Clint laughs in embarrassment. "I still don't know how you do it." Tony looks at Clint. "Smell the silent judgment." Clint points to Tony. "Please, Stark, by all means." Tony stood up and walks over to the hammer, never one to shrink from an honest challenge. Clint looks at him. "Get after it." Natasha smirks. "Here we go." Tony looks at Thor. "It's physics." Bruce points to Tony. "Physics." Tony asks Thor. "Right, so if I lift it, I then rule Asgard." Thor nods. "Yes, of course." Tony starts to try holding the hammer. "I will be reinstituting prima nocta." Tony tries to lift the hammer but fails. "I'll be right back." Wearing his armored hand, Stark tries to lift the hammer again and fails, then both Rhodes and Tony wearing their armored hands. Stark and Rhodes both try to lift Thor's hammer. Rhodes looks at Tony. "Are you even pulling?" Tony looks at him. "Are you on my team?" Rhodes shakes his head. "Just represent pull." They both pull as hard as they can, but failed. Then Banner tries to lift the hammer. He roars as though pretending to change into the Hulk, and everyone either looks at him warily or grins. Tony looks over to Alisa. "Alisa, you've been quiet. You want a shot at the throne." Alisa looks at the hammer, then at Thor. "No, I think that hammer knows exactly who I am, and I'm pretty sure it doesn't approve." Thor smiles. "A wise assessment." Alisa notices Natasha looking at her phone before getting up and walking away to answer it, as Steve stood up and rolled his sleeve up. Clint calls out, "Come on, Cap." Steve grabs the hammer and tries to pull, but it moves slightly, which causes Thor's smile to drop slightly before it returns, as Steve raised his hands. Thor laughs. "Nothing." Tony speaks up. "All deference to the man who wouldn't be king, but it's rigged." Clint claps Tony on the back. "You bet your ass." Maria points to Clint. "Steve, he said a bad language word." Steve sighs as Alisa was covering her mouth to hide her laugh, and Steve looks at Tony. "Did you tell everyone about that?" Tony shrugs his shoulders. "The handle's imprinted, right? Like a security code. Whosoever is carrying Thor's fingerprints is, I think, the literal translation." Thor stands up to grab his hammer. "Yes, it's a very, very interesting theory. I have a simpler one." He tosses his hammer in the air to spin it before catching it. "You're all not worthy." There's a chorus of disagreement from the others. Then there's a loud screeching noise, like microphone feedback, causing everyone to cover their ears. They let their hands down as it fades, and Tony pulls out his device. One of the Iron Legion suits, heavily damaged and housing Ultron's consciousness, stumbles into the room. Natasha looks over to the Iron Legion suits and she spoke down the phone before ending it. "Katie, listen to me. If the Red Room is moving, stay off the grid. Don't use the same name twice. Stay safe, little spider." Ultron speaks. "Worthy? No, how could you be worthy? You're all killers." Steve looks over to Tony. "Stark." Tony presses a few buttons. "Jarvis." Ultron continues. "I'm sorry I was asleep, or I was a dream." Tony continues to press some buttons. "Reboot Legionnaire OS. We got a buggy suit." Ultron continues. "There was a terrible noise, and I was tangled in strings. I had to kill the other guy. He was a good guy." Steve and Alisa looks at the robot. "You killed somebody." Ultron looks at them. "Wouldn't have been my first call, but down in the real world we're faced with ugly choices." Thor speaks up next. "Who sent you?" Tony's voice comes through. "I see a suit of armor around the world." Alisa looks over to Tony, and Bruce also looks over to Tony as he speaks. "Ultron." The Legion shrugs its shoulders as Ultron continues. "In the flesh. Or no, not yet, not this. Chrysalis, but I'm ready, I'm on mission." Natasha speaks up. "What mission?" Ultron looks at her. "Peace in our time." The walls explode. Alisa doesn't wait for the first shot. She lunges across the coffee table, grabbing Dr. Cho by the arm and pulling her behind the heavy stone bar just as an Iron Legion bot fire. Alisa tells Cho, "Stay down, don't move." An Iron Legion bot dives toward them. Alisa doesn't have a suit, but her reflexes are inhumanly fast. She grabs a heavy glass decanter from the bar and smashes it across the bot's sensors, giving Steve enough time to tackle it from behind. Steve yells at Alisa, "Alisa, get to the hallway." Alisa yells back, "Not without the scepter." She sees a bot grabbing the scepter. She sprints, sliding under a falling table, and grabs a discarded piece of Legion armor, swinging it like a club to knock the bot off balance. She doesn't stop it, but she slows it down enough for Thor to realize what's happening. Ultron mutters as he walks away. "That was dramatic." He stops to look at everyone. "I'm sorry, I know you mean well. You just didn't think it through. You want to protect the world, but you don't want it to change. How is humanity saved if it's not allowed to evolve with these puppets?" He picks up one of the dismembered Iron Legion bots, and he crushes the Iron Legion bot's head. There's only one path to peace, the Avengers' extinction. Thor throws his hammer and destroys Ultron's body, and after Thor destroys his body, Ultron starts singing. "I had strings, but now I'm free. There are no strings on me, no strings on me." Alisa comes out from behind the wreckage, her knuckles bruised, eyes fixed on the spot where the scepter was. "It's gone, and that thing, that wasn't just a glitch, Tony." Tony looks over to Alisa. "Alisa." Alisa cuts him off. "You wanted a bouncer. You just gave the keys to the house to the guy who wants to burn it down."